Okay, my name is SHARMAN Murphy, and I'm on disability, permanent disability retirement. I taught for 10 years at the University of California here in Santa Cruz in the writing program. And before that I taught poetry writing workshops all throughout Central California and in the jails and prisons. And so I've been on disability retirement since 1995. So I've had respiratory difficulties, asthma, and so forth since I was a child, and really battled with chronic bronchitis and asthma as an adult, and I take, you know, quite an attractively colored array of medications, and the steroids have really basically they're life-saving, but they are profoundly destructive, and I have been living with the side effects of that for many years now. And I've done many things to try to recoup some health and be able to be an effective parent, raising my son by myself. And one of the things that I decided to do a few years ago, my son loves to surf, and I would take him and then I would like walk on the beach. And eventually I started wading, and it was kind of funny. I had my walker, you know. Then I started, anyway, little by little, I started swimming. Then I made a commitment. I'm going to swim every day. And it's saved my life. It's the best thing, really, that I've done. And in any case, I was thrilled at the progress that I'd made. And in fact, if you hang on one second, I'll show you a photograph. That's me and Devin. And we're in San Francisco at Aquatic Park on September 2nd, and I have just swum from Alcatraz to San Francisco. Yes. And he was my safety paddler. He went on his surfboard. So all I had to do was look at him. I didn't have to, you know, like, where in the city am I trying to swim to, you know? And this was a moment of a great triumph. And it meant so much to him to see his mom, you know, who he's been so worried about, do this big thing, you know. And so this is September, and in November I had an appointment. I see my pulmonologist all the time, and we did the usual, you know, spirometry, lung function test, and I was doing very well, and I had been able to reduce my inhaled steroids, and the less steroids I take, the better, because the steroids are doing all these terrible things, and among other things, they are ruining my skin. But I have asthma, and so I have to also take inhaled steroids, and to keep those at the minimum possible so I can continue to breathe. And I was thrilled in November at where I was. I was doing great, and here I am, you know, swimming every day, and and so I never in a million years intended to be the poster gal for the light brown apple moth spray problem, because I have so many things in my life that I have to deal with that I have very little energy to deal with, and they're crises. And then there's my son and my attempt to take care of him and his own special needs. So I was in complete useful denial about the prospect of any harm coming from the spraying, which is to say, I just said, I can't think about it. it's a pheromone. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just not going to worry about it. I'm going to protect myself, but I'm not worrying about it. So I feel like I am a perfect example of what that spray is really about, because I didn't anticipate harm. I wasn't stressed out about it. I was breathing fine. I was in great shape. And within 2.5 hours of the spraying beginning, I had increasing pain in my chest. I had trouble breathing. I'm going, oh, come on. No, this is true. Oh, come on. No, I can't breathe. And then I started this bronchitic cough that was new, a kind of harshness that, and I have a lifelong experience with every form of coughing, you know, known. This was something different. And so
had you been inside when
I was inside? Well, actually, I was at a friend's house for dinner, and as you know, we didn't know what day the spraying was going to start, and they said, well, you know, next week. Then, you know, oh, it was too foggy. Okay, so all of us are praying for fog. You know, perhaps we could live in a permanent fog belt. You know, and Thursday, in my opinion, was just as foggy as Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday had been, but there was this plane coming, you know, I mean, that in itself was so, I mean, I'm sure that you've heard from everybody how upsetting that was to have a plane flying so close over your house that you can practically, you know, like, you know, say hello to the pilot over and over and over and over and over. And my friend was beside herself with fear and anxiety about this whole thing. She was beside herself. And I was just, you know, let's not worry about this too much. And I had a mask, and my son and I both wore our masks to walk from her house to my car, which was a distance of maybe 45 feet. And you see where I'm parked here, that's a distance of like 10 feet from my car to the house, and that's all I was outside. That's it. And my windows were closed, and I'm going, okay, so I'll overprotect myself just, you know, to be on the safe side. And I get home, and by 10:30 at night, I can't breathe. So I'm going, just, this is real. This is real. I have to do something about this. So I call the hotline. That's been in the, you know, publicized in the paper. I call the hotline, and I have in this folder something that not very many people will have, besides all the newspaper clippings on the moth. I have notes on all the conversations that I had, the multiple conversations I had when I called the hotline. And I was met with an astonishing response from the people who answered the phone, who ridiculed me. And there's one guy who said, I said, I'm calling again about the pesticide that's being sprayed. He goes, you've got the wrong number. I said, well, is this a such and such? He goes, yeah. I said, well, I'm calling about that. He goes, then you've got the wrong number. I won't talk to you. I said, what do you mean I've got the wrong number? He says, what's being sprayed is not a pesticide. It's a pheromone. And I won't talk to you if you call it a pesticide. I'm going, I see. Okay, well, I want to make a complaint. Well, you can't do that. Well, the hotline says this is the line to call to make a complaint. You have to see a doctor first. I said, you know, it's midnight on Thursday, and I don't happen to have an appointment with my doctor right now, strangely enough. So I'm calling you because that's what the paper said to do. And this went back and forth and back and forth. And eventually, I talked to a supervisor, and I have the names of all of these people too, who said, oh no, you could file a complaint. I said, well, I want to. And he said, are you sure you want to? I said, I'm pretty sure. He said, you know, most people don't. I said, well, why wouldn't they? He said, because most people don't want their personal information going to the government. Are you sure you do? I mean, this was a direct threat. A direct threat to me. And I said, why don't you read me the questionnaire? He reads me the questionnaire, and I said, you know what? I'm positive I want to file that report. You're positive? I go, you know, I really am. So let's do it. And so, you know, question, answer, blah, 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 blah. And I said, so now what happens to it? He goes, well, that goes to the Department of Agriculture. And I said, I'd like a copy of it. He said, well, we can't give you a copy of it. I said, well, it's my report. I just gave it to you. He said, well, but this is private information now. This is part of, we can't give you a copy of it. I said, okay. How about a copy of the record of the report of the complaints that I've just filed? Well, I said, I'd like to mail you my report. He says, well, we can't give our address to you. I said, you're the Department of Agriculture. You aren't going to give me your address? He goes, well, no, we're, and I called many times, and I talked to several people, and they all said that they were forbidden to give out their address. So I was sprayed Thursday night, and I've got pictures of the zones. I printed those out for you if you want them. My zone ends at the freeway, which is, as you know, right there, right? And the next zone is over there. So I was sprayed 2 nights in a row, and they of course claim there's no drift, well, I was sprayed twice. And unlike most people, probably anybody else, I happened to coincidentally have an appointment with my doctor the day after the spraying. And I came in there, and she listened to my chest, and she goes, oh my God, oh my God. You know, and she wrote, I said, I need something in writing. So she wrote a note, you know, that here I was with an exacerbation of asthmatic bronchitis, and that it was completely absent before the spraying. And it was really, it couldn't have been more clear that that was the cause. There wasn't anything else different. I didn't eat anything. I wasn't around it. It was no perfume, no nothing. No, nothing else could have caused it. And so she said something that has haunted me ever since. We talked about what it is for a person with an already compromised immune system or already compromised respiratory situation to be exposed to an irritant or a toxin, and the dangers of that. You know, and we talked about, well, what about the homeless people who can't come inside, or what, you know, so forth and so on. And then she said, what about the babies? You know, and I'm haunted by that because the respiratory system doesn't really fully develop for the first 3 years of life, and any infection or irritation, inflammation of the airways that happens in those first 3 years causes the lungs to develop more mast cells than usual, and those produce histamine, and that sets that child up for a life of asthma. And as a person who's had a life of asthma, I would like to spare anybody that. And babies can't march and protest and sign petitions and file complaints with the Department of Agriculture, you know. So anyway, so my doctor signs this note, and then I try to figure out what to do with it. And here's, so there's several things that I think are really important about my situation. One is how sick this made me. And the second is how hard it was for me to report it officially. And the third is that it's been impossible for me to find out whether the information I reported actually went anywhere. And then there are a bunch of other issues, like even if it did go somewhere, does anyone read it, or what are they doing with that information? But I think there are very, very few people who are able or would be able to do what I did in order to make this official complaint, because it is literally almost impossible to have made the complaint. I called back the hotline. I said, okay, I've been sprayed twice now, and I want to make another complaint. And, well, you know, what you have to do is file an official form. I go, great. Can you fax me the form? Well, we don't have it. Well, could you tell me where I could get it? Well, we don't know. I said, okay. So, there's an official form, and I have to fill it out, and no one's going to take my situation seriously until I fill it out. And you are the government representative, and you don't know what that form is or where I can find it. They go, yeah. I said, okay. I said, if you were me, what would you do? Oh, I don't know, maybe contact local health department. So I called the local health department. And that's, you know, another dozen phone calls. And reached, you know, the environmental protection, environmental control person. And they said, there is a form, and it's on our website. Well, you know, you have to find it on the website. It's under, you know, X box, you know, for physicians only, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then you find the form, and then you print it out. Ah, and I have one for you. I made a copy for you. And so you get your form, and you're like, oh, cool, I got my form. Now you've got to make an appointment with your doctor. That costs money. You know, and I said to them on the phone, I said, are you going to pay for my hospital? I mean, my doctor's visits? Since I have to go to the doctor to have this done? They go, well, no. I said, oh, funny thing. Okay, so I have to go find, you know, make another appointment with the doctor, and she fills it out, you know, and she's like totally in support of this. You know, yes, we are going to do something about this. And then on the form, it's like, okay, well, what do we do with the form? There's nothing on the form that says what to do with it, where to send it, nothing. I'm going, no, this is odd. So I have to phone the health department again and track down the person who says, well, I don't know. Why don't you fax it to me? I go, okay. So I fax it to that person, and a couple of weeks later, he calls me back and says, I'm following up on all the reports. I've got this stack of reports here I've got to follow up on. I go, great. And are you still sick? I'm going, yeah. And so he's going to send all this stuff to the state. And I said, can I have a copy of what you end up sending to the state? He said, oh, I don't see any problem with that. But I never got a copy. Okay, so that's about the form. So I was sprayed Thursday night, the 8th, Friday night, the 9th of November. And then here's another issue that I want to raise. And this is something that has not, I think, been in the news. You know, and I said, as I said, I've got a folder here full of clippings on the moth. Sorry. But that's the effect that it had on the ocean. And you know, as I said, I am an ocean swimmer, and I've done a lot of research into red tides because they come periodically, and they look alarming. And I have a phone relationship with the person at the health department who regulates water quality, and over the past few years, and I've done a lot of research. UCSC, you know, has a whole. They've got some experts on this and so forth, and you know, so we all know that red tide is an algal bloom, and it is supposedly not harmful to a human immersing him or herself in the water, as long as you don't eat vast quantities of mussels that have concentrated the toxin, right? So I'm going, I can't breathe. I've got to get in the water. I've got to go swimming. And I go down there and go, oh, it is the worst red tide I've ever seen. I go, come on, don't be afraid of it. So I go in the water, and I swim for a little while.
And you have a wetsuit on?
Oh, a wetsuit, yeah. Yeah, full, yeah. And I just go, this is really different. This is, I'm sorry, I can't talk myself into this. So I swim for a little while, I get out, and I come home and I take a shower, and I barely made it from the shower to my bed. I was felled. I could not get up for 3 hours. And it took me like days to be able to, and I called Steve at the health department, and I said, oh, I think you need to know about this. And he said that he had been inundated with calls from surfers who couldn't get off the couch. He said, this is different. He said, this is toxic. You can't, this red tide is not safe. Do not go in the water. And he said that in his 25 years of covering the ocean, he said red tides are common. We know. He said he'd never seen a red tide as extensive and persistent as this. It covered the entire bay. Now, they sprayed Thursday night, they sprayed Friday night, and then it rained. And algal blooms are caused by runoff of what chemical? Urea. And what was the pheromone packaged in? Urea. So the thing that astonishes me is that nobody has publicly really made this connection. That we had the spraying, we had the rain, we had the runoff, we had the red tide. And then there's this mysterious die-off of birds in Moss Landing. And oh, well, gosh, that they called it the mystery spill in Moss Landing. And finally they had to, you know, acknowledge that, no, these birds are dead because of the red tide. And if I'm a mammal and I'm in the water for 40 minutes and I can't get out of bed for a week, what happens to the marine mammals who live in that water? And we don't know. We don't have any idea. And what does it mean to take a risk that big with that important a resource, our ocean? So, I take a break. I can't breathe. Yeah, I did recover from that eventually, but I filed 3 of those formal reports that I mentioned. I've got the form. Oh, I'm going to use it. You know, I filed 1 complaint for what happened on the 8th, another complaint for what happened on the 9th, and another complaint for what happened in the ocean on the 12th. And so all that's filed. Then I'm trying. I had to really increase my inhaled steroids after this spraying, and I was not able to reduce it. And the inhaled steroids are better than taking systemic prednisone or Medrol, but they are still, it's the same medicine, and it is still absorbed systemically and consequently has all these deleterious effects. And so it was very, very disappointing to me, and I went to visit my pulmonologist about 5 weeks after the spraying. And he's quite cautious in in anything that might involve that has a political aspect to it. And that's okay. That's what he does. And anyway, did a spirometry, and my lung function was decreased by something that seems modest, 6 to 10%. But but that is on a 60% increase in steroids and a 200% increase in bronchodilators. And so with that huge increase in medication, my lung function was still less than it had been before. And so I am like this perfect person. I've got data. You know, I have the pulmonary function test from right before the spraying. I've got the pulmonary function test from 5 weeks later, when I still hadn't recovered. And I never recovered. I never did recover the full ability to breathe and the ability to come down on my steroids. And then what happened was, now I can't prove this, but this is the way it makes sense to me physiologically. That set me up for this catastrophic infection that I got in January, February. That almost killed me, and I was in the hospital for 8 days, and the only reason that I left the hospital is that I ran out of IV sites for those reasons that I was talking about before, and they literally could not find a vein. And so I said, well, can't find a vein, I have to take my medicines by you know, mouth, I'm going home. They're going, you're way too sick. I go, I know, but you know, I'm going home. and I've been home for 6 weeks, and I am desperately sick still, and I'm on you know, they put me on systemic Medrol, high doses of I mean, this is a tough choice, you know, but the bottom line is, you don't breathe, you die. So you've got to, that's a situation in which you've got to take the Medrol. And I hadn't been on Medrol in 10 years. I was really feeling like I made a lot of progress. And I have, in that first 2 weeks, I lost 5 pounds of muscle. You know, that's what they'll, you know, do. And physical therapist came out here with the home health. She goes, you look good to me. You know, and it's sort of an ironic thing because, you know, if you don't present as like looking desperately ill, then, you know. I said, well, you know, I appreciate that. And she came in and she goes, okay, now I'm going to test your strength. She goes, now squeeze my fingers. So I go, okay. She goes, no, I'm asking you to squeeze my fingers. I'm sitting there. She goes, will you please squeeze my fingers? And then she looks at me, she goes, oh, I get it. She goes, you are really weak. And so anyway, she put me on a series of rigorous physical therapy exercises. She goes, okay, lift the, she had me lifting a you know, a can of soup. I'm going, that's not working. She goes, how about a can of tomato paste? She was quite resourceful. And so, you know, I started out with cans of tomato paste, and I've progressed to cans of soup now, I'm happy to say. We're going to move on to bags of frozen peas. But, but anyway, here I am, and this has just like taken the ground out from under me. I've got a 17-year-old son. Fortunately, he's not in kindergarten anymore, but he's got a very full, busy life. He's an extremely wonderful, talented kid, and one thing that's happening right now is my son has Tourette syndrome, and which is a neurological condition caused by an overactivity of the neurotransmitter dopamine, and it results in involuntary motor and vocal tics, and it's a highly misunderstood condition. And he has been a hero in not just being open about having Tourette's, but helping other people see how their own disabilities can not just be accommodated, but can become true gifts. And he's a spoken word artist and a slam poet. And he wrote a piece about having Tourette's. And he performed it on March 22nd at the San Francisco Opera House before 3,200 people at this Grand Slam finals competition for a spot on the Bay Area's Youth Speaks Poetry Slam team. And it was one of the most powerful things that I've ever seen. And to see his ability to take an experience that's profoundly personal, and make it accessible to an audience in such a way that they can live through his experience and have their own experience that is separate from his. And anybody who's ever really struggled with a challenge or a disability or being misperceived by the world was given voice by this performance. And he takes you through what it is to have Tourette's, the way he's perceived, and what he has done with the true gifts of having Tourette's. And that's how he sees it. Well, right this moment, Devin is in Washington, D.C. at the biannual international conference that the Tourette Syndrome Association holds. And we've been asked by our chapter for years to go, and I haven't been well enough. And this year I was well enough. And we booked tickets, and you know, we're going to go to this thing. We were going to go to a 2-day youth ambassador workshop, which was a parent youth combination, and then the 3 days of the conference. And the Tourette's Syndrome Association is tonight awarding Devin their top sorry. I mean, this is good. This is a good thing. Their top national award, a recognition for the work that he's done in the world on behalf of so many people. And so I was thrilled because we were going to go and do this. Well, we had to cancel the youth ambassador part of this thing because I can't go. I'm too sick. And I'm so sick right now that in a way I can't. I don't even miss being there, but today it's really hitting me, you know, because I would like so much to be there and you know, see my kid perform that piece in that setting and get some recognition from the world for how courageous he is. And I can't be there. And I'm supposed to be taking him to different colleges to see where he might go to college, and I can't. I'm too sick. And the only reason I made it to the Opera House to see that performance is that we have a group of extremely wonderful friends. And they drove me in my wheelchair and Devin, and all I had to do was sit in the car, you know. And they have a cigarette, well, that's sort of an iron, you know, that little plug-in in their car, and I could take my my nebulizer treatments all the way up and all the way back. But I feel like I'd made a lot of progress, and I feel like my life is being stolen from me, and my ability to really have the time with my son that I really want so much to have and that he wants to have, and I'm too sick, and I feel really robbed. And I feel that I mean, ever since this happened in November, I'm going, I've got to do something about it. I have a civic responsibility. I have the tools. I'm a writer. I have to do something about this. And I wasn't able. I was too exhausted and too overwhelmed with all of these other emergencies of, you know, making sure I got the medicine filled right and making sure Devin actually got on the right plane and, you know, that kind of thing. And emotionally, I needed a certain amount of space to be able to, like, okay, how am I going to address this? And I couldn't do it. I'm going, Sharman, write an op-ed piece. I couldn't face it. And so when I had this terrible illness and I get out of the hospital, I have a friend, the friend whose house I was having dinner at. And she organized a support network for me, and I wrote up a list of things I really needed help with. And I told her one thing that is on the top of my list is I have to get my information to somebody about this spraying. I have to do it. And so there was some deadline about, you know, submitting information, and I had her come over the day before and sit here. And I sat here and I go, okay, I'm doing it. Today I'm doing it. I've got to make this report. And I just sat down and wrote the whole thing out. If she hadn't been here, I would not have been able to do that. And I have a copy of that for you. I'm going, I don't even know where this is going, but, you know, and then Glenn Chase, I guess, is the person who contacted you. And so I am enormously grateful to you for your work, because I couldn't do it otherwise.
So is there any doubt in your mind whatsoever that your condition now is linked to the spraying that you were exposed to?
No. No, I don't have any doubt about it, and it really scares me. In a number of ways. What does it mean? What does it truly mean that they did this?
And are going to do it again.
And not only are they planning to do it again, they're planning to use a different substance, which raises all kinds of questions. If the checkmate was safe, and I am hallucinating, then why not use it again? But maybe the checkmate wasn't safe, so we'll use something else. Well, doesn't this raise exactly the same issues as we had with checkmate, which is you're using something else that you don't know what its effects are going to be, right? And there have been, you know, I'm sure that you've been, you know, documenting this incredible massing of information about how long the moth has actually been here in the county. It's not 1 year, it's been here for a decade. About how innocuous it is, about how it, you know, its effects in New Zealand and Australia are very minimal, about how the biologists are convinced you can never eradicate it, and there are other ways to contain it, and so forth and so on. That this issue has not to do with the moth. That they are not, in fact, attempting to eradicate the moth. That this is about trade contracts, and it's about the way the contracts are written, which is originally California had these contracts with Mexico and so forth that if you have X pest and you're, you know, then we won't, you know, as a way to protect our own agricultural industry. Well, it's coming back home now in more ways than one, because if we have evidence of a moth, then we can't sell our produce to And I think that somebody needs to look at those contracts, because do the contracts say you need to eradicate the moth in order for us to buy your lettuce, or do they say you need to have done these certain things in response to the moth, so that if you spray, you say we sprayed. It doesn't mean we got rid of the moth. It means now we get to sell our produce. And so rather than convincing the population that the spraying is safe, perhaps the agriculture department could take its vast resources and look at rewriting the contracts, renegotiate those contracts. We live in a world where it's impossible to prevent an animal from traveling in the pocket of somebody on a plane from one country to another. And what are we going to do about that? And can we realistically kill every bug? You know, and then how does that affect the rest of our ecosystem and so forth?
Any reflections about the democratic process or lack thereof involved here?
That's a really a very important question. I'm first of all, in my whole personal dilemma of like, how do I get my story out? There's part of me that said, you know, back then, I have so many like fights on my plate. Here's one I don't have to take on because other people are doing it. And yet I do feel that personal responsibility. But I have been very impressed with the organization of opposition. And, you know, there are subcommittees, there's legal committees, there's health committees, there's this, and our elected officials at the city and county level and in the legislature are all very active and have, you know, filed suit to prevent this. And so you go, this is an incredible demonstration of the people's ability to organize and to get information out and to do research. And those biologists from UCSC who went to New Zealand and came back and presented it. It's like, in the face of that, are they going to spray anyway? What does that say about our ability as a people to really articulate our needs, have them heard, and have them respected? What does that mean about a democratic process? And what kind of a system do we actually live in? It's extremely upsetting to think of that. You know, frankly, this is it's very scary. Then they talk about spraying San Francisco. I think they're really gonna have some difficulty. But is it going to stop them?
What would you say to the people up where we are who haven't been sprayed yet, but we can see it coming, and what would you advise us?
Well, my pulmonologist would advise you to just leave town. So what? You lose your job. Leave town. Not everybody can just leave town. I, for instance, am too sick to leave town. But the more, I guess I have a real faith in the power of knowledge and the power of truth. I really believe in it. I really believe in the work that you're doing. And I'm extremely grateful for it. And so I would say, the more people can be informed and the more people can be organized, the better. And then the greater the chance is of preventing this. But one of the things that has been really upsetting to me is that for instance, 200 or 300 people in Monterey filed health complaints. And the state's analysis of it was that, and this is a very interesting exercise in the interpretation of data. Their analysis was, first of all, we're not going to look at each complaint. It's too many. So we'll just look at it sort of as an aggregate. Second thing is, the spraying in Monterey was really quite light, and no harmful side effects are expected from a light spraying. Conclusion: no harm was done. In other words, it didn't make any difference how many people filed a complaint or the specific content of those complaints, because they weren't supposed to have gotten sick. The conclusion is that, in fact, they didn't. This is very Orwellian. Rather than going, oh my goodness, we never thought anyone would be getting sick from this, and look at all these people who got sick. We must not have known that this was going to make them sick, and now we know. So now we're going to do something different. And so it's terrifying when you think, okay, I can marshal all this data, I can file my silly little forms that people laugh at. It doesn't make any difference. They're going to do what they're going to do anyway. What does that mean about the society that we're living in? And again, what do the babies do? You know? And something I've thought really, really hard about this since that conversation with one of my doctors. I've thought really, really hard about this. That there's a certain way in which I am dispensable. Here's a person with an already compromised immune system. I'm already, I've got asthma already, right? So if something is sprayed, well, given 3 people, and I'm one of them, I'm probably more likely to react than the other 2, let's say. And I'm more likely to, die, let's say. Now, I think that it is reasonable for a society to weigh that and say, what is the greater good? Is it more important to us as a society that we have a protected, healthy food supply to feed our people? Not that that is really what we're thinking of when we're talking about agriculture. But to make that social choice, is it more important for us to protect our agriculture or take care of these few outliers who are already sick? That's a choice a society can make. That no, for us, we really are going to protect our agriculture business. And these other people can move or die or whatever. But if a society is going to do that, it has to really look at doing that and say, this is actually the choice we're making. Are we going to say that the old people, sick people, people with compromised immune systems are dispensable? They maybe cost us too much anyway. It's costly to, my medicine's expensive, Maybe we're better off without them. That's a choice a society can make, but it has to, I think, confront that ethically. But in reality, it's not just the person with the already compromised immune system. It's also the people whose immune systems aren't yet compromised, but will be. And it's also, again, the little children and the babies. You can frame this in an even bigger picture of the madness that's inherent even in the language that's used about the budget, about how much money we are willing or even feel inexorably compelled to spend in Iraq, or not in Iraq, but on the war, versus the amount of money that's available to, provide health care, food, and so forth. But that in the same breath, anybody in the government could say, we have to fight this war, and we don't have enough money to extend health benefits to poor children. That there is a literal insanity in that. But if you take that as the context, the bigger context in which this particular issue is being fought out, really, fundamental questions about what a society chooses to support, and how, from a certain perspective, it is an act of insanity to not see that the most important resource that we could possibly have is our children. What does it mean to be building a country by sacrificing your children? And that when you have a principle that decisions are driven by the underlying principles, and if the underlying principle is building a healthy society in which people really feel empowered and have choices, then if that's the underlying principle, then you recognize the importance of feeding and educating and nurturing children and the families that need to support them and their health. If the underlying principle is what is perceived as economic strength, which is at best temporary, then that principle is going to drive your choices. And in this case, in this particular case, that principle then results in the spraying, because the spraying is what's necessary to satisfy the specifications in the contract in order to sell our produce. And those principles will inevitably backfire. Inevitably. Because when you undercut the care of your humans, then you will undercut the economic strength or potential of your own society.